My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
News you need to start your day.
Dated first thing in the morning.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Again, Tony Gosling, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Hi there. Yes, from the UK, not New Zealand this time.
Yes, last time we chatted, you were far on the other side of the world, closer to where Luke is right now.
I certainly was. And it's interesting picking up on what you're saying there about the robots, this kind of robot world that we're moving into. This is very much part of, I think, what you've been picking up on over the years, many of us have, is that there is an attempt to sort of remove humanity from all decisions. The idea really is that the computer and the robot can make a better decision than a human. It's like the tyranny of the chess computers, basically, over humanity. And, of course, this is what's needed. In warfare, it's very difficult to get people to do horrifically unethical things, particularly soldiers who are well-trained, well-disciplined, to, I'm not necessarily saying obeying the law, but to obey commanding officers, and also that they've taken that ambition to, maybe through some sort of moral feeling in there somewhere. I mean, okay, so many soldiers are not particularly moral, but they think they're fighting for something, rather than, anyway, so the way you get that out of the equation is you cede all these decisions to some sort of AI bot somewhere that's been programmed by a very unethical person. So, I mean, I just think there's a real attempt to get humanity out of all decisions, whether it's economic decisions. And so it makes it easier, I suppose, for a power elite to rule, for example, we've got the situation in Europe at the moment where there are still attempts to get a European army going. And quite obviously, there's going to be resistance against that from the existing army in Britain. Do we want one of our divisions, battalions, whatever, commanded by a German general? And the answer is no. There's something just no about that. Yeah. So, and this is why I think they're bringing in so much of this AI stuff, is to try and get rid of these human decisions that are made, particularly in warfare. So anyway, after that little rant and a ramble, let's crack on.
Well, Tony, just on that, actually, do you think a lot of that is by design or just by emergence, or perhaps a combination of the two?
Well, okay, so many of the policymakers and the financial people can't get the ordinary people or corporations even. Some of the corporations, of course, are worse than others, but particularly the military, to do what they want. I think that's really what it is. And so they have these various ambitions, like intimidation and surrounding of China and North Korea, for example. And there's pushback within the military against this for very sensible reasons to a certain extent. It's just to do with self-preservation, saying, well, we don't want a war, unwinnable war. Thank you very much. But I think at the back of all of this, if you really want to peel away the layers of the onion, right in the core of it is this whole idea of game theory. And what's happened over the decades, certainly the decades since the Second World War, is that much of the geostrategic thinking has been about playing it as a game. And if it's a game, then you can tweak things and potentially you can win the game. If you're starting to think about it as some sort of, struggle of one might against another, it's not so easy. But if you're you can also, of course, you can program it, you can game it, and see if we do this and we do this, we win. So game theory is extremely important now, I think, in geopolitics internationally, in that they want to translate everything into a game, and that's why sometimes, for many of us, we look at it and say, well, this is insane. You're just treating everything like a silly game, and we want nothing to do with it. By many millions and billions of people switching off from a lot of this stuff. You and I dig in, but most people just don't want anything to do with it. They want to get on with their day. They want to look after and love their kids, and they think, well, this world is crazy, so let's just turn our back on it. And but there are a few of us, crazy enough to devote our time to trying to unpick it all.
How influential do you think in these gaming attempts are secret societies, like, for example, the most obvious being the Bilderberg group?
Right. Well, Bilderberg, yeah, you spoke to me a bit about that the other day. Bilderberg is a really interesting. I found it fascinating to make the connections between the deals done at the end of the Second World War, the what happened to the Nazi money, all the looted billions. Well, it was around about $1 billion at the time, which is a lot of money back in 1945. And the deals being done between the British and the Germans before the war had finished. And the creation of the Bilderbergers 10 years afterwards, in the same spot as this Arnhem battle took place, which there were several senior British officers basically through the fight let the Germans win, and deliberately, and something like 10,000 British paratrooper casualties resulted. That is, captured, injured, dead, sacrificed at Arnhem for that purpose. So Bilderbergers, I think, as a kind of in-joke, basically created the organisation in the same spot as the battle took place at Oosterbeek in 1954, the very first meetings. One of the things that I didn't mention last time, which I think is extremely important, very, very basic stuff, is I started looking into this when I left the BBC in the mid-1990s. And I was really annoyed that I didn't know anything about it. There's quite a lot of people, of course, in big media, in the Western world particularly, who do know a lot about it, but they don't say anything because they're told don't say anything, and they just do as they're told. So there's either the people that know and the people that don't know, and not a lot in between, and not a lot talked about it in the mainstream media. For those people that don't know, Bilderberg is basically it is secret. I mean, it's a link up between the most powerful bankers, royalty. There's also a smattering of big media. Well, some of the biggest media in the NATO countries. It is just the NATO countries, by the way. And so you could see it as just a political lobby of NATO. So it's where NATO comes to pick its leaders for the various political leaderships of the NATO countries. There's a lot of oil companies. There's a lot of big media tech. And so the general background to it, something that people like Charlie Skelton and I have been figuring out. He's probably one of the best writers. Daniel Eston has done the book, but Charlie has been doing the reporting. Many of these Bilderberg conferences, Charlie gets down there, and the thing I love about him is he's also a comedy scriptwriter. So he teases out some of the idiocy of all of this and makes it a fun thing to report on. He's done that in The Guardian for a long time. The new editor, Kath Viner, has sort of turned her back on him for obvious reasons, because they're part of the conspiracy, the Guardian. And he's done that in other outlets, Charlie. But we figured out basically that there's been a character change in Bilderberg over the last probably 15 years or so, in that it's gone much more over to the tech companies and the social media companies rather than oil, because it was oil and the Rockefeller family that were running it for many years. They then got into banking 30, 40 years ago from oil, and that is now moved into trying to control the narrative through social media. As you were talking about Twitter just now, there is quite a bit of rivalry. I'm not convinced, by the way, that Elon Musk is going to be any kind of great revolutionary, interesting person to own it. We shall see. But anyway, the important point to try and make here about really connecting it directly to Freemasonry is I looked into in 1998 when I first first few years I was digging into the Bilderbergers. And I came across, I'd done a Reuters database article search, which is quite a handy thing to have access to. There's lots and lots of stuff there that wasn't online. And one of the items on there was a curriculum vitae of a guy called Andrew Palmer. Now, Andrew Palmer put on his CV, and he put in there, that he was the organizer of the 1998 Bilderberg meeting in Turnberry in Scotland. So he's not on the list that goes out with not for publication, to all the various publications. So this is really to let the media editors and the managers know that Bilderberg's happening and know to not report on it. He is down there as the organizer of that meeting. But one of the other things on his CV is he was the personal assistant to the Duke of Kent, the cousin of the Queen, uncle of King Charles now, who's the Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge Freemasons. So he's a top Masonic personal assistant to the top Mason many would say in the world, United Grand Lodge, and also the organizer of the Bilderberg conference. So this is making an absolutely direct link between Freemasonry and Bilderberg. There's no real doubt about it. If you look at the originators, Joseph Rettinger, Prince Bernhard, Rettinger definitely was a Mason. The Poles have come up with evidence about that. And so this has got Freemasonry written all over it. Now, just as a general thing, Freemasonry isn't all bad, but you'll find most of the most powerful lodges will recruit people from the outside into them. Very much like, black magicians, black witches will recruit white witches into their system. So it's a kind of way of keeping it all concealed and recruiting who you think are the most ambitious and easy to corrupt people into your cult, effectively. This is what, and Freemasonry is a religious cult. All sorts of belief systems involved in it, which we don't really need to go into here. A lot of them linked to the Phoenician Hiram Abiff, and the rituals that they go through are all related to the building of Solomon's temple by the Phoenicians, who were basically a child-sacrificing death cult, maritime power of about 1000 BC, and probably were involved in the construction of the pyramids in South America and many other places around the world. They had a much, much greater reach, most definitely on the high seas than people realise. And I was just thinking about this the other day, that the only reason that they released the knowledge of the American continent to the public with Christopher Columbus and John Cabot at the end of the 1400s was because they wanted to have mass migration, and they decided to do that. So they thought, we better tell everyone that North America and South America are there now. So that's how cynical I am about this. I think they keep lots and lots of this information secret, quiet, technology secret and quiet until it's appropriate for something as basic as electricity. These societies, I think, for many years have understood and been experimenting thousands of years with electricity. Once it comes to the point where they think it's to their advantage to have power grid lines around the world and give people electric power so that they can get everyone hooked on it and then up the price to make it almost impossible to afford it and plunge people into debt. Once they've got little plans like that up their sleeve, then these technologies are rolled out to the general public much more. So I think there's a hell of a lot we don't know. And that's the first job of any journalist, really, is to admit how little we really do know about how things really work. And, I've spent most of my adult life, and certainly all my journalistic working life, trying to figure out, put the jigsaw pieces together about how power really works. And the secret societies are most definitely a big, big part of it.
Okay, Tony, I think before we continue, I just quickly need to go to a break.
Go to tntradio.live. Dismiss the talk of an amnesty. It's time to put these bastards in jail. Today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Tony, one of the things that I realized after reading Daniel Estulin's book about the Bilderberg Group is that they were a secret for decades, and they are no longer a secret now, and everybody knows that they exist. Same as the Freemasons, it's a pretty lousy secret. I mean, is it fair to still call them secret societies?
Well, of course it is, because the actual contents of what goes on in these meetings are secret. You don't need to be too much of a genius to work out what goes on. They give you, in the Bilderbergers, for example, they give you a little list of what's being discussed, usually in the upside down order of the importance, like they put Ukraine at the bottom. I see this year. Obviously, Ukraine is the most important thing that the NATO countries are discussing. And so they do try and disguise it like that. But, we do know that these organizations exist. What we don't know is how connected to power we are. We had I think, fascinating discussion about the anarchy. This is in the 1140s in southern England. There was a big battle going on of succession to the English throne after the Norman conquest. And in those days, there would be one of these warlords, the barons, would turn up in your village and sack your village and burn it down. You knew who was doing it. You knew who was in charge at the time. Nowadays, we're in a very, very different world. The way that power works is much, much more secretive. The idea is that, you see somebody do something, whether it's, an ISIS terrorist attack or something, and the idea is that the blame is being put on someone completely different. So everyone is supposed to be hating somebody who wasn't actually responsible for it at all because of all the machinations of the mass media. You think about it, we've got the mass media now, and we've got nuclear weapons, which have completely changed the game for the elite. They think that they can use the nuclear weapons to scare people into everything, including the politicians and the journalists and the media owners, by the way, and that they can use the media to twist the mass media to twist people's perceptions and to keep things out of the public mind that the public should know about. And so this is all the actual content, I think, of what goes on at the highest levels in Freemasonry, and it's quite clear to me that there are links between the Masons and the creation of wars for geopolitical aims. So we don't, you have to do a lot of digging in order to find out what is actually going on. In fact, there was a guy who worked for American Free Press, Jim Tucker, that he did a superb job at the Bilderberg conferences of actually going there a few days beforehand, cultivating, one of the members of the bar staff or something, and finding out during or after the meeting, arranging to meet them outside the conference. What have you overheard? What are they talking about at the bar? This kind of thing. And that's good old traditional journalism. And that's what the massively resourced, $1 billion, billion pound, billion rand, whatever, media should be doing. They should be probing these things, but they're not. They're inside. They're in on the inside conversations. In order to try and gain an advantage over their competition. They're not telling the public what's going on. So, yes, they are secret because we don't know actually what's, a lot of the time, what is actually being discussed in there. We can only make guesses. And I think particularly important at the moment, where we're looking at wheels within wheels and hidden agendas, is the so-called green agenda, where, I worked, I suppose you'd say, as an environmental campaigner, really around social justice issues and land rights and squatting in England, helping organise mass trespasses, squats, occupations, that sort of thing in London in the 1990s, and in and around the country, actually. And you could see that there was a really, what we were doing was saying, well, we just don't want these in the urban setting. We don't want these mass supermarkets, luxury housing. What we want is affordable housing. We want green spaces and parks. So I was part of that movement, but I've seen it being hijacked over the decades or so, 20 years or so since then. And I've seen it completely hijacked with this Extinction Rebellion type of environmentalism, where they're not even targeting, as we used to do, the crooks and the people who are doing things wrong. They're targeting the general public who don't have any choice as to whether to go to work by car or not. Blocking motorways, this sort of thing, is just pointless. It really is. And what they're doing is they're antagonizing the very people who are the victims of the, bad environmental decisions to get rid of the railways or whatever and make public transport unaffordable. And so there's been a hijacking of all of that, but it's part of a much, much bigger, wider thing. I don't know if you've come across or you've had interviews with Rosa Koire, the United States. Well, she wrote a book called Behind the Green Mask. And she died last year, very sadly. She was an absolutely brilliant writer and researcher, and she dug into the fine print of Agenda 21, signed in Rio in 1992, I think it was. And she showed that these sustainable development goals were actually really just a way of privatizing the planet into the hands of the big corporations, the same big corporations who've been making a mess of things. And you could, I speculate that this was deliberate, that the big oil companies made a mess and trashed the environment only to give an excuse for the environment to be then, these people to turn up almost like a kind of white knight in shining armor on the horizon and say, hey, the environment's in a mess, let's save it. And I think, Rosa's done a superb job in that. In the UK here, we've got Sandy Adams down in Somerset, who's done a similar job in picking apart this green privatisation agenda. Because what they want to do, we've seen Gates doing all of this, haven't we? Buying up land. They want to buy up the planet. They want to privatise the planet into their own hands. They want to control the food supply. And Jim Rogerson, who was on my show, I suppose, if I'm allowed to do a plug for my program, I do a weekly show on the internet now, because we were booted off of FM during COVID by the Bristol Mafia. And on that program, Jim Rogerson he was the Conservative leader of Ribble Valley Council up in Lancashire, and a farmer, and he could see all these policies coming in to hit farmers, and he's saying things like, why does the government want to cut the food supply? What's the government? Why is the government doing this? Because farming, if anyone hasn't realised, is the basis of all civilization. You know, once you start having a food surplus, you can start to, people can start to do things other than farming, and they can build museums, libraries. They can do other things. And so, why would you want to attack your farmers unless you wanted to attack whole of civilization? And that's what they're doing. And he pointed out a very important point, which I never see made anywhere else. I was chatting to the New Zealand farmers about this too, is that the attack on the livestock farmers is for a specific purpose, and that's because many of these owner-occupiers who own maybe 300-400 acres and rear cattle and sheep on there are the only part of the food chain which is not controlled by the big boys, by the car dealers.
That's interesting.
Some have said, well, what about the chicken farmers? They're not. Yes, they are. All the chicken feed is controlled by these people. The prices are all monopolised, ring-fenced, and everything in the food chain is. And that's what I think. We've all hopefully seen the influence of Vanguard and BlackRock.
Yes.
With the power that they've got, and almost all these industries around the world. So you've got this illusion of competition going on. And we've got this, I don't know if any of your viewers have ever watched the US cartoon Rocko's Modern Life. I don't know if you have. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
If you haven't,
no.
Watch it. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I think it was put together to launch the Cartoon Network many years ago, or Nickelodeon or something. But in that, they have poor old Rocco is this wallaby trying to survive in corporate America. And they have this company in there called Conglomo, which
Yes, that's quite funny.
His neighbour works for Conglomo, and their little strapline underneath it in neon on their massive headquarters tower in New York City or wherever, it says, Conglomo, we own you. Yeah, so
that's great. Listen,
brilliant. The Americans sometimes come up with the brilliant stuff. So anyone that's not seen Rocco, get it. Watch the whole series, because what he's doing is he's poking fun at this kind of almost fascistic. Everywhere you go, there is some sort of con trying to suck you into to some sort of financial relationship and indebt you and sell you rubbish and nonsense. And he manages to survive and keep smiling through it. Good old Rocco. Tony, it's only a cartoon, but it's a much bigger point.
The conversations that we're having is about sort of secret societies, and we've kind of been hovering around Bilderberg and Freemasonry, and everybody kind of knows about them. I recently bought a book by John Coleman. It's called Conspirators' Hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300. And what's interesting to me is that there are so many of these groups, these secret clubs that exist, that have very powerful people connected to them. Are they something to be concerned about?
Well, look, the Committee of 300, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I read that many years ago. God, I'm thinking about, must be on the internet in the mid-1990s. And I just didn't think that there's, if for people like me who've worked in mainstream media, when we had like literally millions of listeners on the radio in London where I was working, and you've just got to be very careful, I think, about putting stuff out that you can't stand up fully, and I think the Committee of 300 stuff is a bit like that. I just find it difficult to fully back up what it's saying, but that doesn't mean to say that there are other sorts of secret societies. Of course there are. One of the most important, of course, is the triads, and there's been some very good stuff written about the Oriental triads. And so, there are others which are sort of open secrets, like there's the Committee of 30, which is, I think, has got Mark Carney on it, the former governor of the Bank of England, and various other people who are the executive, almost like the business executive for Western capitalism. But look, if you really want to get into the stuff which is really evidenced, I see it as, and it was written a lot of this was written about in John Robison's book. I don't know if you've come across this, the Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments, which was published in the 1790s. Right. John Robison is one of the best writers on the Illuminati and secret societies ever, partly because he was a Freemason himself and he was part of the Industrial Revolution. He was a friend of James Watt, the inventor of the steam engine, and he could see the way that the Freemasonry was being twisted in Europe. And his book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, talks about the organization of the Illuminati, that the way they were putting it together to have these kind of commands in every country. So each country was going to have its kind of parallel Illuminati government, parallel Masonic government. And each country would then be looked at, how successful and how powerful is this? Now, this is all there and it's all documented. By the way, it's a funny irony, really, that Robison was the inventor of the siren. So every time you hear a siren going off, he was the first guy to ever invent one. And but his whole object in putting all this information together, and I mean, what he got done is he got a load of the original of Weishaupt's and his co-conspirators' projects for, and plans and little sayings and things like that. He'd managed to get it from the German police, who at one point shut it down. And so he published a lot of that, saying, look, guys, we've got to be very careful because this is going to be pernicious into the future. Freemasonry was a completely different type of organization in the 1790s. It was the only place that people like you and I could go to speak freely, because the tyranny of the moral police and the church out there was absolutely horrific. If you said anything out of line, like, well, I think the earth goes around the sun rather than the sun goes around the earth, you could get into all sorts of trouble. So these were speakeasies, places where people could freely speak their mind. But he's identified the way that they had been used and they were being changed, Robison did, into something which was much more pernicious and an attempt to take. And it was religions and governments. That was their main aim, to take those over. So I think that's one of the most important books for anyone that's interested in secret societies to read, because first of all, it's quite entertaining. For example, he talks about how he first came across these Illuminati. His friend, a friend of his in the Freemasons in Edinburgh, had been about to go abroad for some months, and he said, I've got a very special box here. Can you please look after this for me? Take care of it, because I don't want it to fall into the wrong hands. And obviously, as a fellow Mason, protecting his mate from persecution by the church or whoever, he said, yeah, I'll look after that for you. Anyway, this guy disappeared for years. And after a few years, he was walking down the main street in Edinburgh, and he saw him on the opposite side of the road. He said, oh, hi, and he waved to him. And this guy completely ignored him, blanked him, looked the other way, as if I don't want to know this guy anymore. I'm far superior to him. Anyway, so he thought, when he went back home, he thought, well, that box, if he's going to treat me like that, I'm going to open the box and have a look and see what's inside it. And it turned out there was a whole load of Illuminati writings, which was his first awakening to the fact that this organization, effectively a kind of satanic organization or Luciferian organization, that's ambition was to rule the rest of humanity, existed. And whether the Illuminati is still formally around today, I don't know. But it's there's something similar around. But anyway, what I was coming to, the point that I was trying to come to, was, sorry, it's so long-winded, but is the P2 scandal in the 1980s in Italy shows exactly how these Masonic groups control governments, control the press. Because when the P2 scandal broke, I think it was 1986, Propaganda Due was a Masonic lodge in Italy that was running the country. They had leaders of some of the political parties, not the communists, for obvious reasons. Americans were very influential in it. And Licio Gelli, who died a couple of years ago, who was a fascist, was the chair of the committee, this Masonic lodge, who was a Grand Master, who was running it. This is, I think, Grand Orient Freemasonry in Italy. And they had all of the leaders of the banks, the media, the political parties, the usual suspects, anyone with any power and money in Italy was sitting around that table, and they were deciding which government was going to be elected. And in fact, they were involved in the the kidnapping and murder of Prime Minister Aldo Moro in Italy. So it's a very good example of exactly how these secret societies operate. And I think this is exactly how they work around the Western world now in most of the major countries. Worth saying something, I think I mentioned Cecil Rhodes, didn't I, when I spoke to you the other day, but a very important figure who there was a genuine understanding at the end of the 1800s, end of the 19th century, that the British were on the route to taking over the world with the British Empire. And so Rhodes tried to set up this, well, he did set up a fund, a secret society, he called it in his will, in order to try and complete that. But of course, the fact that it was hijacked by some really unscrupulous people who wanted to use it for their own ends has meant that it never came to anything. And we've now got the situation, actually the British Empire, the opposite happened. The British Empire collapsed, and we've got the Americans have attempted to take it over after the end of the Second World War. So I think you've got to look at history in terms of attempts anyway of secret societies to take over, and also use examples like the P2 in Italy to see exactly how Western nations are run from behind the scenes by these, basically by fascists. I mean, Gelli was a fascist. He believed in corporate power. He thought that the big companies, a bit like in Nazi Germany, that Nazi Party was originally funded by the big steel companies, Thyssen and Krupp, said, oh, well, we will just give you whatever it is, 10 marks for every ton of steel we sell. And so, not surprisingly, the Nazi Party wanted to rearm and spend loads of money on steel. So lots of that money would come straight back into their own coffers, which, by the way, Martin Bormann controlled at the end of the war. And then he came to London and South America with it to start a financial Fourth Reich. But that's a whole other story.
But there's an interesting pivot because I mentioned that book that I bought, but another book that I have with me, not so much a secret society, but certainly a highly influential organization, and that's the Fed. It's a book by Edward Griffin, a creature from Jekyll Island. And this is right in front of you. Yeah, well,
yes, the Federal Reserve. I mean, control of money is absolutely key to these people's. I mean, I don't know if your viewers, listeners, have seen the Money Masters and the Bill Still work on the money system, because I think that's probably the best expose and detailed forensic look at the way the money system operates. I think, is it called The Secret of Oz, is more recent of his films, documentaries made about the money system. And, it's quite clear that back in 1929, in the Wall Street crash, which affected everyone in the Western world and all over the world, really. But the Wall Street crash was deliberate. It was timed on a specific day for a specific purpose. And that was to create a depression, which would also then create the right employment situation, in other words, mass unemployment, where lots and lots of people would then be quite happy to join the army and fight in the war, join armaments factories and this sort of thing. So there's I think a whole, I mean, the money system is absolutely key to a lot of this. And of course, what they want to do is to keep us dependent on money. And they use their influence within governments to get us more and more dependent on money. That's mainly through the Article 25 rights, that is, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights after the Second World War. We've got the right to food, we've got the right to water, we've got the right to shelter, we've got the right to employment. All of those basic rights have been eroded. And of course, it's not a right. If you need to earn money and you can't get a job to pay for your food and your shelter and your water, it's not a right anymore. It's a privilege that some have and some don't have. And I think that's where the powers behind the money system make sure that as many of these basic essentials we need to live and our rights under Article 25 of the Universal Declaration are we have to pay for and we don't have anymore. So the slow stripping away of those rights has put more and more people into the hands of the financial system. And what does the financial system do? Well, it creates its own morality. I don't know if you see what I mean, but it's you're making decisions in your value system based on money. How much money can I make out of this? If I do this, will I make money? If I don't, and all of your what's going on in the back of your brain here is click, 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 money, money, money. I need more money. I need to make a decision based on that. And what that does is it pushes out our moral sense as, humanity, as individual human beings. We've got a moral sense. Is it right or wrong? Well, that gets, booted out because of the power of the money system. I mean, we've got here in the UK, there are a lot of, I would say also, these are environmental campaigners, etc., that talk about land tax. Oh, the land tax would be brilliant. What a fantastic... No. Land is a basic essential. Yeah, you tax luxuries. Tax luxury yachts. Yeah, don't tax the piece of land you need to grow some vegetables on. Yeah, so it's a basic thing. I remember getting taught this when I was living and working in Southampton at the BBC down there by a guy who was at the university I was sharing a house with. He said, look, it's really simple. Tax luxuries. Do not tax essentials. And we've now got the situation in Bristol, in my home city, where the local government authority is coming for council tax, that is to say £5,000 or so that everybody has to pay the council for council services, from people who've got no money at all, from the disabled. They're starting to do this now, where they're saying, well, you've just got to find £5,000 a year to pay us. This is the most regressive tax in the world. So what we're seeing is the money power asserting itself and saying, we're going to screw the poor. The rich are going to get off tax-free. The rich pay no tax. Everybody knows the rich don't pay any tax. They pay a bit of income tax on their income as it comes in. But then as soon as they get the money, that gets put into a tax haven. Like the Channel Islands or Switzerland or somewhere, and they never pay any tax on it again. So they're putting the tax onto the poor now. Now this is quite obviously, it's wicked, it's evil.
Yeah,
how dare you? You're just screwing people because they're weak and they can't fight back.
Tony, I'm going to continue with you in a moment. I think the most obvious and most relevant quote unquote secret society at the moment, Tony, is Davos. Well,
see, they're not secret, really. They are. I mean, okay, I know what you're saying. It's secret society. It's not quite overtly a religious cult, Davos, but it is in a way. I see what you mean. This is about the people who worship at the Church of Money. These are the people who create the mass. I mean, for example, in Bristol, we've got this enormous great shopping centre, Cabot Circus, it's called, named after the guy that sailed over in 1497 to Newfoundland from Bristol, financed by the Italians. And in there, if you look at I don't know if any of your listeners, viewers want to do it, you can look at the actual map of the shops and the map of the centre. It's a human heart. If you look at it from above, it's even got the sort of arteries going to the car park nearby. It's a shape of a heart. These are the people that really own, I think. And when I say it's a religious thing, I think that's exactly, that is their religion. They believe this, and they have their temples and, whatever, banks and shopping centres. In the old days, of course, it'd be a nice little church or whatever, a chapel. People would sit and pray. This is where everyone is on a Sunday now. They're in there. And Davos is particularly clever because it's held at a place which is impossible pretty much for the traditional protesters to protest at because it's so freezing cold. And high in the Swiss Alps mountains. But I mean, they are now. I mean, they did this. The most important thing I think about those is your partnership agreement in 2019 with the UN, because the UN's running out of money. Davos is awash with money, and so why not just get together and let's have a hostile takeover of the United Nations? A lot of the UN now is being funded through the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum's Great Reset is really an attempt to have a potentially slow, maybe accelerating, very fast 1929 style disaster. They've already gotten into the situation where these governments are massive. The complete failure of the British government to stand up to the international mafia. They're bringing in legislation or they have done in the UK, to give all government agencies impunity from the law, which does suggest that that's a formalisation of a mafia state. And so the likes of Davos are the only power left standing, really. A lot of speculation. I don't know if you've ever on your show gone into the accelerationists, But these are the people, I think, are the ideologues behind all this. So that what they're saying is we want to accelerate this change, accelerate the Agenda 2030 changes, accelerate the ascension of the World Economic Forum to be the sort of de facto United Nations around the world. In terms of policy and sorting out disputes, trade disputes, the only disputes that matter to them, which of course can lead to war disputes. But the accelerationists are a group of Nietzschean philosophers, mainly Nietzschean philosophers, who are trying to get rid of what is called the cathedral. The cathedral is all these civil society kind of organizations, which are like, for example, like the church, Mothers Union, voluntary groups around the place.
Media plus government plus academia.
Yes, as well. You see, the thing is, even academia is being subsumed by them. Here in the UK, almost every piece of research that's now done in universities, and much of the curriculum is pro-corporate, so it's being done to feather the nest of some big corporation somewhere. And the actual teaching that's being done is nothing to do, of course, with criticising corporate power. And so the universities have slowly been subsumed as the amount of central government money, taxpayers' money that gets spent on universities has decreased. The amount of private money that they're having to bring in order to survive has massively increased. In fact, we did a piece about this on Friday on my programme at thisweek.org.uk, which looked at, actually was an interview with Dr. David Hughes at Lincoln University, who's looked at the contents of the COVID jabs. And he's done a whole paper looking at the 26 studies around the world, which show strange, peculiar items, including what appear to be massive blood clots appearing in people's bodies. And actually within the vials themselves before the mRNA jabs have been injected into people. And I said to him, I asked him the basic question, well, how come you're the only academic in Britain that's really gone into this and done a paper on it? And he explained how much of the funding and how much of the agenda of every university now is controlled by the big corporates. So it's a slow but sure fascist takeover. I'll go back to Martin Bormann because this is the original funder, I think, in the late 40s and early 50s of this financial Fourth Reich, where they use banks instead of tanks to take over countries. And they've been doing that for a very long time now. So the accelerationists, I think, are at the core of this, kicking this change into a genuinely fascist system where the democratic processes around the Western world are completely sidelined. And we have a different kind of governance, openly a different kind of governance, where they say, oh, the democratic system's failed. Actually, maybe we need this nice new corporate system. Now, that will be accompanied, no doubt, with some sort of cultural revolution with lots of great music and all this sort of thing. Everyone starts dancing around thinking, oh, isn't this brilliant? But actually, no, it's not. This is a fascist takeover. And this is the way they do it. Hitler did this in Nazi Germany with the sorting out the finances of Germany. A lot of people, when Hitler first came to power, loved him because suddenly they had a job. They could buy bread, basic stuff like that. So they always try and sweeten the pill in these corporate takeovers. So check out The Accelerationists if you haven't already. Ian Davis at UK Column has done one of the best articles I've yet seen so far about the people that want to accelerate this change to fascism and get rid of the old democratic system. Now, democracy, obviously, the various systems are flawed, but the principle is very important, that the government does what the people want. Basically, that's it in a nutshell, rather than that what a tiny elite want.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've got maybe 4 minutes or so left, so I guess let's sort of come in for a landing. But if you were to describe or to summarize, Tony, the significance, shall we say, of secret and perhaps not so secret societies, what would you say?
Well, look, this is a thread which has been running throughout history. I mean, really back to the ancient world. I mentioned the Phoenicians, didn't I, briefly? These people functioned as a secret society. They went and traded with various populations, including the English, on the eastern Atlantic, the Irish, etc., the Norwegians. They spread their Phoenician language around there. They were a religious cult. They were sacrificing kids and this sort of thing, and so it goes back a long, long, long way. And I mean, one of the books that I put out as a paperback during the Halloween lockdown in 2020, it's nearly 2 years ago now. Is what I think I've done a pretty good job in putting together much of the activities of these secret societies ever since the English Civil War, because we need to understand the English Civil War happened because Charles I tried to stop the process of expanding the British Empire. And once I don't think he really knew what he was doing, but he was trying to stop some bad things that were going on, privatisation of land, enclosure in England. And that was stood in their way. And so I've done a book called The Siege of Heaven Reader, which is an anthology of something like 60 or 70 articles from various different, everyone from somewhere different, about the action of secret power behind the scenes ever since the English Civil War, and including quite a lot actually on the assassination of Princess Diana. Because, I mean, this is when everyone's looking at King Charles now, he in Britain has banned the brilliant documentary. He's managed to get it banned. The Panorama documentary with Princess Diana that, explained to the nation and to the world the horrific treatment that she'd had at then Prince Charles's hands. And that he's got that banned, and he's now one of the leaders of this so-called Great Reset, the Agenda 2030. I think we have to understand the man is, if I'm allowed to say it, he's been involved in killing his wife, for goodness sake. Why would we want to take any notice of what he's got to say? What I've done in the book is I've, just in that particular section, is document that. So that's called The Siege of Heaven Reader, and you can get that via Bilderberg.org. It's on eBay.
Okay, Tony, very, very quickly, you just mentioned that website. Is there any other way I can follow your work?
Well, yeah, thisweek.org.uk is the weekly news program, and if you send me an email on that site, my email is on there. Then I'll send you a weekly digest, news digest. Which is, it's pretty comprehensive. It's links, everything. I try and do everything is so you can check it thoroughly through. We're not just speculating. We're talking about facts that are being suppressed here. So that's thisweek.org.uk. Then I've also got a 9/11 forum. That's the number 911forum.org.uk, which is a legacy from the UK 9/11 Truth Campaign, which I was running their bulletin board. But we have all sorts of interesting stuff about news as it develops and critiques on terrorist attacks and things like that on there. And the final one is the Land Rights Campaign, which is The Land Is Ours. That's TLIO.org.uk, with a lot of information about, what's going on the attempt to literally privatise the planet into private hands, into corporate private equity firms trying to buy up the earth beneath our feet.
Tony Gosling, as always, it's a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you. Cheers, Jeremy.
And thank you, Luke, for keeping this last hour going. Don't forget to email me, jermwarfare@tntradio.live. Jump into the live chat. It's on the website, tntradio.live. I will be back with you in the next hour. My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.